Most of my savings are gone. Not all of it, but most. The kind of money that takes 8 years to build when you're careful, when you bring your lunch to work, when you skip the weekend trip down to the coast, when you tell yourself not yet soon. 8 years of small, quiet decisions that added up to something I was genuinely proud of. I didn't talk about it much. Women my age, raised in small towns in western Oregon, weren't brought up to talk about money, but I knew it was there, and knowing it was there let me sleep. I'm 65. I retired 14 months ago. I live in the same house I've had for 22 years, in a small town outside Eugene, the kind of place where the trees are so tall you lose track of the sky, where it rains from October through April, and nobody really minds because that's just how it is. It's quiet here. I always thought that when I retired, the quiet would feel like a reward. I want to tell you about a piece of paper I signed 3 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon in a bank branch off Highway 99 that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. Because that paper is the reason I lie awake sometimes now, doing math in my head that never quite adds up the way I need it to. He didn't fix it in time. I was in my kitchen when the bank called. I was making coffee, real coffee, the kind I grind myself, one of the small pleasures of retirement I'd been looking forward to for years. One of those ordinary gray mornings that you don't know will matter until suddenly they do. The woman on the phone was professional and not unkind. She explained that as cosigner, I was now part of an active collections process. She used the phrase joint and several liability. She said it the way you say something you've repeated 1,000 times, smoothly, with no particular weight, which meant it arrived on me like something very heavy dropped from a great height. I set my coffee mug down on the counter very carefully. I don't know why I remember that detail so specifically. Maybe because everything else in the next few minutes felt like it was moving too fast, and the mug was the one thing I could control. Just set it down gently. Don't spill it. Hold on to something ordinary. The months that followed were paperwork and phone calls and one very honest conversation with the financial advisor my neighbor recommended. He told me the truth plainly, which I appreciated even though it was hard to sit across from. He said there were paths forward, but all of them cost something. All of them meant reaching into that account. And that's what happened. $186,000. That's what I had put my name on. And most of what I had saved over 8 years went towards settling that debt. Not a small portion, not a trimming around the edges, the majority. The amount that had made the future feel like something I'd already half built, gone. Over several months of paperwork and phone calls and more signatures than I could keep track of. I didn't cry much. That surprised me about myself. I just sat with the papers and looked at the new number and thought, so this is how it happens, quietly, on a Tuesday. Over coffee, you never finished. David and I are okay. I want to say that clearly because I know what some of you might be assuming. There was no blow-up, no estrangement. He found out what had happened, not right away, but eventually, and he drove up from Portland, and we sat at my kitchen table for a long time without talking. The rain came in off the valley the way it does in November, steady and gray against the windows. Finally, he said, "Mom, I didn't know they could do that." And I said, "I didn't either." That's the truest sentence in this whole story. Neither of us knew. He calls more often now. Sometimes he offers to help financially, and I tell him no. Not out of pride exactly. It's more that I don't want to add a new layer of obligation between us. I've carried enough weight inside relationships to know that money changes the texture of things, even when everyone means well. I'd rather have him call on Sundays. I'd rather he just comes up for dinner when the weather breaks. What's hardest to accept isn't the money itself. Money is concrete. You can count it, plan around it, adjust. What's hard is the particular feeling of having believed you were careful, of having actually been careful for decades, and then discovering there was an entire category of risk you didn't know to look for. I spent 30 years managing offices. I understood contracts in my professional life. I read policy documents, vendor agreements, lease renewals. I considered myself a competent person with paperwork. But loan agreements, cosigner agreements specifically, are written in a language that looks like English and functions like something else, a legal dialect. And I had never been taught to read that dialect. No one had ever explained to me that simultaneously in a collections clause is not the same as sequentially, that the small print numbered list on page 4 is exactly where the most consequential information lives. I didn't know what I didn't know, and the document did not volunteer to explain itself. My retirement is smaller than I planned. My pension covers the basics. I worked in county administration long enough to have something modest coming in, and I'm genuinely grateful for that. I'm not in crisis. I don't want this to sound like a disaster, because it isn't quite that. But there's a difference between enough and secure, and I had worked toward secure. I had almost gotten there. Now I'm back to enough, and most days that's fine. Most mornings I make my coffee and sit by the window and watch the rain come across the fields, and enough feels like plenty. But there was a trip I'd been planning, the Oregon coast. I know it sounds almost too on the nose, living here all my life and never having taken a proper week on the coast. But I wanted to do it right. I had a specific stretch in mind, south of Lincoln City, where the rocks come out of the water at low tide and the light in October does something I'd only ever seen in photographs. I'd looked up a rental, priced it out, knew exactly which week I wanted. I've stopped looking at that listing, not because I've decided I'll never go. Just because right now the money it would cost has a different job. It has to stay still. It has to be held very carefully, because there isn't enough of it left to let it move. I think about that Tuesday afternoon sometimes. The loan officer, the stack of papers, David sitting next to me, looking hopeful in the way that only your children can. Like the whole future is right there in the room, and it's good, and it's close. I think about the moment she slid the papers across the desk and said, "Initial here, and sign at the bottom." I signed quickly, the way you sign when you've already decided, when slowing down feels almost like an insult, like you're searching for a reason not to trust your own child. If I could go back to that moment, I don't know that I'd change my answer. I might have said yes again, but I would have said it differently. I would have said, "Can I take these home for a few days?" I would have found someone who spoke that legal dialect fluently and asked them to read page 4 with me. I would have asked one specific question, not eventually, not theoretically. What happens to me the moment he misses a payment? That one question might have changed everything, or it might have changed nothing at all, but I would have known I asked it. I'm 65 years old. I've made a lot of decisions over 65 years. Most of them I'd make again without hesitation. Some of them I'd make more slowly. This one I'd make more slowly. There's a version of wisdom that sounds like a warning, and I'm not trying to give you that. You'll make your own decisions about the people you love and what you're willing to put on the line for them. That's not something I'd try to talk anyone out of. Love makes us do things that don't look rational from the outside. And most of the time, that's not actually a flaw. But there's another kind of wisdom, quieter, less dramatic, that's really just attention. Slowing down long enough to understand exactly what you're agreeing to. Not because you don't trust the person asking, because you owe it to yourself to know what the words mean before you add your name to them. I didn't know. Now I do. The coffee was cold by the time I understood some things. But you make another cup. The rain keeps coming in off the coast, same as always. The trees are still taller than I can see the top of. I still live in the same house, and I'm still here, just a little differently than I planned.